demonstrating, modeling the right approach to treat others when someone is a victim.
Mentioned, lack of reporting and people are afraid to step forward, they're embarrassed, and we do shame people a lot, unfortunately. We do, sort of shame the victim. And I'm always saying, a young lady came on the radio, on the news a couple of weeks ago, and she said that she was raped. And she had to convince the persons to stop the car to say, hey, I'm not crazy, I've been raped. And people were like, she shouldn't do that, that's embarrassing. And I'm thinking, what is embarrassing? She should do it. Who should be embarrassed is the rapist, the person who did this. Yeah.
I think the first leg is that of education. We have to take more time to inform, educate the public on what is gender-based violence. Parents, we have to target specific population.
The church was used in a positive way. The church, the religious settings, an ideal place for you to nourish, for you to get followers. You have a captive audience every Saturday or every Sunday or every Friday if you go to the mosque,
right,
where people are sitting and listening, and they believe the religious leaders. I feel religious leaders and religious communities are so very important. Let's use Martin Luther King for an example, and a number of leaders in that movement. They came together in the religious communities to try to change injustices within society.
But understand, it's a process. It's a process. Sometimes we don't want to go through the process, so we abandon God's words. Don't abandon God's word in your process. Don't abandon God's words in your process. In John 17:17, he says, sanctify them through thy word. Thy word is truth. See, there are many things we can't trust in this life, but I can guarantee you, you can trust God's word.
Sometimes we have distorted predictions. God designed our mind to be able to process a potential outcome. That is something that other creatures don't necessarily have the ability to do. We have the ability. That is a God design. Having God's DNA in us, he gave us a fraction of who he is and his ability to see from the beginning and the end, and he allowed us to be able to project with our thoughts, what could the potential outcome be if I XYZ?
Hello, and welcome again to another exciting episode of Zoom Hope Live. And I don't know about you, but I have all week anticipate the continuation of last week's discussion. Of course, this is part 2 of a 2-part series on gender-based violence. And wow, it was a blast. And you have just seen that recap. And if that was part 1, wow, part 2 is going to be even more interesting. But as you're here, we just want to remind you, please visit our website at zoomhoplive.org and connect with our different things that we have there, as well as our social arms. You can visit us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and if you're watching on YouTube, our guy is still right here. And oh yeah, he wants you to get that subscription up. All right, he's a part of the family now, right? So please get those subscription up. Okay, you see, he needed to come. All right, we promise we'll get them up, sir. All right. Thank you very much. So if you have not yet subscribed, please hit that notification bell as well as subscribe so you can receive our live feed as we go live. So it's very important to be a part of the family. Again, as we enter the discussion today, we want to hear your opinions. And of course, your questions are also welcome. We have a special segment that we will be looking at those two segments that we'll be looking at those. So based on as they come, we're going to look at them and we're going to engage you as well. All right, so we are about to get down to the nitty-gritty of part two. But first, let me introduce you again, just quickly, to our guest. They are Pastor Barrington Brennen and Miss Gaynel Curry. Both of them, they're here again. Welcome, Jenna folks, again
Good to
to
be here.
Live.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, all right. So let me just help the audience to just know a little bit about each of you. Right. So Gaynel, she's a human rights advocate who advise governments and other entities around the world on a wide range of human rights and related issues, including the same discussion we're having here: gender equality, gender-based violence, elimination of violence against women and girls, and sustainable development. And of course, she has a plethora of other contributions that she has made in the United Nations, just around the world on these matters and in this area. She's also an adjunct professor at the University of the Bahamas. And then, of course, we also have Pastor Barrington Brennen. And he's no stranger also to most of us. He's a co-founder. He's a co-founder and co-president, along with his wife, Anik, of Sound of Encouragement Association. It's a non-profit organization that is dedicated to restoration of life and helping people smile again through the medium of seminars, workshop, publication, radio, television, and research. By the way, we were just talking about some of his radio program here in the Bahamas and abroad. Pastor Brennen, he is a family life therapist as well as a counseling psychologist. So these two individuals who are here with us on Zoom Hope Live, they have more than enough knowledge to be able to impact lives, not just for time, but for eternity. So welcome again, and we are going to enjoy the discussion today. So let me ask, just in a nutshell, I'll ask Pastor Brennen first and then Miss Curry. What's your highlight? What's your take back from last week? Is there something that stick out that you want to highlight that now?
Well, I just would like the viewers and listeners to be reminded that domestic violence or gender-based violence is real and alive. And this program, I am happy about this program because it is one of the agencies or mediums that will be used to squash it,
Yes.
or to help squash it, or to educate and inform. Also, I think that helped last week. There might have been one person or two or 20 or 30 in the quietness of their home that was touched. We will never know it, but through my years of experience in what I do, the silent ones, the ones we never see and hear, they're the ones that really get the most help. So we're hoping that person's viewing this or hearing this, heard it last week, would have already been encouraged, starting the healing process or help others.
Right. Awesome. Gaynel?
Thank you. I think two things really sort of jump in or have been moving around in my brain a lot this week.
Right.
And that whole issue around how we in the Caribbean see violence against women and girls as normal. And that Pastor Brennen actually read one of the special rapporteur on violence against women, her note regarding her visit to the Bahamas and how it is so normal and people treat it as such a nonchalant thing. Yeah, that happened, and how that's something that keeps coming in my mind. When are we going to be outraged as a people in the Caribbean? that this is happening. It should not be normal. That's the first. That's really the first thing that's sort of jumping in my mind. I want this not to be normal. The second thing is the importance of the church as a partner in addressing this. We, as we said last week and is known, the church is where we go to find comfort, where we go to, get counsel, where we have our families. We grew up there in most cases. And so this is a big part of our socialization process, the church, right? It's one of the biggest socialization institutions in our countries in the Caribbean. We have to recognize the important role that the church has to play. We have to partner with the church, and the church needs to step forward in a positive way to see how we can bring change in our society with respect to violence against women and ending all violence against women and all violence. I'm always advocating for, no violence at all by anyone. If we can have that utopia, that'd be great. But let's start with really focusing in on addressing violence against women, particularly women and girls, particularly given the large numbers of women and girls that are affected in our region daily.
Yeah. And awesome. Can I expand something you said about the church? I had the privilege of living on 2 Bahamian islands. One over 300 miles from Nassau, the other 145 miles from Nassau. And what I had discovered, this is in the 80s, okay? So I'm a young man, and
that's right.
And there are 3 institutions, or 2 main institutions in these remote family of islands, we call them in the Bahamas. That's the church and the school. And unfortunately, parallel to them is the barroom or the rum bar or the saloon, okay?
Yeah.
The church and the school. You want to get something out? Send a message to the school and send a message to the church.
Yeah.
And I'm an Adventist. I was an Adventist pastor for several years on these islands. And every time there's a funeral, every time there's activity, all churches are expected to attend in some of these small remote areas. So, and on top of that, or what comes out of that is sometimes these are places, a ripe nest for some forms of abuse, incest, because it's such a quiet place, domestic violence, and acceptance of violence, verbal or physical or both, as to be normal. And so this is what I observed. That's 40 years ago. It still exists today.
It does. All right, folks. So it's going to be exciting. It already is. And we're just inviting you to please share the link. Bring some folks close by. Let they watch this because it's very important. On the next side, we will delve into the discussion. But just before that, I want you to get some blood flowing as we listen to Jovan White, my very good friend, Pastor White, as he will give us a Caribbean medley. Be blessed.
Hallelujah, hallelujah. If you believe God is worthy to be praised, let's lift him higher, higher, higher. Let's give him all those sorrows, all those pains. The Bible says, cast your cares upon the Lord, for he cares for you. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, come on, let's put our hands together. Let's give God the highest praise. Here we go, I'm trading my sorrows. I'm trading my sorrows. I'm trading my pain. I'm laying it down for the joy of the Lord. I'm trading my sorrows. I'm trading my pain. I'm laying it down for the joy of the Lord. I'm trading my sorrow. I'm trading my sorrow. Trading my pain. I'm trading my pain. I'm laying it down. Yeah, for the joy of the Lord. In harmony now. I'm trading my sorrow. Trading my pain. I'm trading my pain. Yes, laying it down. For the joy of the Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Everybody say yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Everybody say yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Amen. Come on, declare it over your life. Declare it over your life. Come on. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Amen. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. He is worthy to be praised. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Amen. Come on, open the eyes of my heart. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I wanna see you. I wanna see you. Said open the eyes. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I wanna see you. I wanna see you. To see you high, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing holy, holy, holy. To see you high, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing holy, holy, holy. Yes, holy, holy, holy. Everybody say yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Come on, declare it over your life. Everybody say yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, everybody sing yes, Lord. 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 Amen. Yes, Lord. 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 Amen. And my answer will be yes, Lord, yes. And my answer will be yes, Lord, yes, yes. And my answer will be yes, Lord, yes, yes.
All right. Yes. Minister J, you did it. You did it. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes. Wow. And persons who are going through the press, this is really the song to let you know that, the Lord has something better and greater for you. In fact, for all of us, as we go through this life. So thanks again, Jovan, for your ministry. Minister J, that was really good. Okay, we're jumping right into the discussion now, but we're reminding you, viewers, please, you're part of the family and a part of the discussion. So we're looking right now in the chat for your comments. We're looking for your questions. And please let us know also where you're watching from. Okay, so Gaynel, perhaps you could start us off with the discussion. What are the international and national policies that are there concerning gender-based violence?
Just muted. Okay. Yes. No. Thank you for that. I think it's important that we start with the law. What are the international legal standards? Yeah, and I will have to say the violence against women has been very challenging. As it is challenging at a domestic level, it is challenging internationally. And it's been difficult to get agreement on this issue. So we have, for example, the CEDAW Convention, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which was entered into force, I think, in 1981. So quite some time ago. And I think it was almost 10 years later, or a little more than 10 years, that we actually got a declaration on the elimination of violence against women. So there's nothing specifically saying ending violence against women in the CEDAW Convention, even though the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women specifically looks at this issue whenever they meet states and try to encourage states to implement the international standards toward women in terms of ensuring equality for women and empowering women and so forth. The convention itself, the agreement signed by states, and that is perhaps that convention is one of the most ratified conventions, as more states have signed onto it. But equally, it is the convention or the agreement or the treaty, however you wish to call it, that has the most reservations, as in, I will do this, but not that. So I agree to this convention, but I won't do this, this, and this. I won't do Article 3. I won't do Article 4. So it has the most reservations by states. So states say, okay, I'll sign on. I'll agree to sign on to this. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to reserve my right on this, this, and this issues. And a lot of those are around issues that we might think relate to violence, that relate to equality in real sense. So just to say that has been a challenge internationally. And in 1993, states came together at the UN again to say, okay, let's try for a declaration, not a convention, because a convention has legal obligations. You ought to be reporting. You're obliged to do certain things at the national level. You ought to be putting systems in place, introducing national legislation to respond if it is a convention. For a declaration, you're encouraged to do so, but you're not obliged to report. You're not obliged to do something. So there's a declaration on the elimination of discrimination against women. And there have been recent discussions, still ongoing, as a matter of fact. Should we have in the international community a convention, a legally binding international instrument that will hold states accountable for the level of violence that women face in their country? Because, if you think about it, violence against women, and I'm using that a lot because for me, that is what is really the challenge. We know, as we said last week, gender-based violence can actually impact men as well and boys as well, but the impact is really most often felt against women. And this is a wide range of issues. It could be physical violence, verbal violence, psychological violence, sexual violence, socioeconomic violence, and restricting people from actually having any money, forbidding them to leave their homes, forbidding them to work, this kind of thing. That's a form of violence. And we talk about this in the context of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, harassment. We talked a little bit about that last time. Little girls sometimes get harassed from age 7 and 8 years old in some of our societies. And harassment, of course, as we know, continues throughout the lifespan, in the workforce, in school. They're harassed and, people are referring to your body parts. All of this is a part of violence. All of this is a part of violence against women and gender-based violence. So I will say that internationally, CEDAW looks at it generally when they're reviewing the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, but it is not explicitly referenced in that convention. The Declaration on the elimination of violence against women, which all states have agreed to, say that they're going to do their best to end it, but again, it's not legally binding. So there are some discrepancies internationally that I think still needs to be addressed, and states are still at that. And we had a long discussion with the former special rapporteur on violence against women, Rashida Manjoo, who really was pushing for a legally binding convention. So that's where we are. But there's also some, I want to just mention briefly that we do have a convention in the Inter-American system that is very much, we have all signed on to it, and we ought to be looking at it a little bit more concretely. That's what's happening at the international level, and I'll give it back to
But let me ask, can we go a little further again now? I think I'd like you to give an example of maybe one or two specific policies or challenges in the convention. CDOR, an acronym for Coalition on the Elimination of Domestic Violence, you say, against women. Give us an example of where a country or some countries have difficulty within this specific policy or whatever. All right.
A challenge. Go on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the challenges, for an example, has to do with anything to do with sexual reproductive health and rights. Right.
Okay.
So issues around, the right to health and what that means. So there's always a broad discussion around what do you really mean? Are you talking about abortion? Are you talking about safe abortions? Are you talking about access to contraceptives? What are you talking about when you talk about sexual rights? Right, or sexual reproductive health and rights. So that's a challenge. And are you really including issues around the age of marriage, for an example? In some countries, it's very young, right? You have it at as young as 12. We have in the international standard that it should be 18. And there's a discrepancy in some countries. Some have it at 16, some have it at 12, some don't have any. So that's kind of where the challenges is, where they will say, well, we won't agree to that because the international legal standard is 18, right? For when boys and girls become adults. And so we're not encouraging any marriage before that. Or we're certainly saying that should not happen. But many states have said, no, we don't want that. We're not signing on to that. So we're opting out there. For us in the Bahamas, for an example, we have several reservations. We have a reservation on gender equality itself. And it says in the convention that men and women should be equal in society, right? That's basically what it is. So no discrimination based on sex. And we talked about sex last week being biological, right? And so there is that. We say, well, we're gonna put a reservation there because that's not really in our constitution. We're not gonna do that. And that has a lot of discussion around what we talked about before with respect to the referendum, why it failed, why it didn't go through here, why it didn't go through in Grenada, for an example. They also had a referendum that failed with respect to gender equality. So it's like we're saying we don't want to discuss gender. So we will be a part of this convention as long as you don't question us on what we consider as gender equality. Equality based on sex. So we have opted out there in the Bahamas. So there are many different areas. It's usually around that particular issue of equality between men and women, is around the issue of sexual reproductive health and rights, and should children have access to services, and at what age should they have it? Here in the Bahamas, we have a very interesting dilemma. We have the age of sexual consent being 16, but you cannot access contraceptives, and other girls cannot access this until they're 18, or boys for that matter. So children cannot access until they're 18. So that between the ages of 16 and 18, there's a bit of a gap. So what are you doing with that gap, and what happens there? I mean, we need to look at those types of discrepancies when we talk about policy, because when we say that we're going to have services available at 18 and above, but you're free to have sexual intercourse when you're 16. That's a challenge. That's a real challenge, because when we link that to issues of sexually transmitted diseases, there's a concern, because girls between the ages of 17 and 21 are the ones are the ones with the largest number and growing still. Even though we've had a reduction in HIV, an example, HIV and AIDS
Yes.
in this region, in the Bahamas, the number that continues to be persistent and persistent and persistent is girls between those ages. And the girls between those ages are having sexual intercourse with older men. And we know that because boys that age are not having the same numbers of STDs, the sexually transmitted diseases.
Right.
So we have a discrepancy there with the policy as it links locally and as it links internationally. So we need to think about these issues and trickle down and all the way down to how is this impacting the lives of girls who are finding themselves not in a position to negotiate sex at 16, not in a position to negotiate condoms, and not in a position to go and get any condoms or anything to protect themselves because they're too young. And so we're saying, okay, well, you're just left on your own between the ages of 16 and 18, and there's no support for you. So those are the kinds of inconsistencies where we have policy locally and laws locally that are inconsistent with each other to begin with. The ages are different. The consent and services, they ought to be the same, no? If I can have sex, I ought to be able to negotiate.
You're correct.
Yes.
You're correct.
That's a challenge.
And could we manage?
That's an example.
Could we tell the people, I think we referred last time, because I have 2 points I want to bring up. But first, that the Bahamas has to report on the development or progress of adherence to or application of these policy matters to the United Nations every 5 years or so?
4 or 5 years, yeah.
Yes, okay. And oftentimes we cannot fully report.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, the United States, the big United States, does not sign on to one particular convention that most world countries, including the Bahamas, have signed on, and that's the one with child abuse, I think it is.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
Convention on the Rights of the Child and CEDAW, they're not ratified CEDAW
sure
either.
Exactly
They've
what the
signed it, but not
rationale.
ratified it. Mm-hmm.
They do have their own policies that protect against it, stronger than many countries who signed on to it.
Sure.
But yet it's interesting. Okay, but I want to, Pastor Larry, I'd like us to put this policy matter in another perspective too, because first of all, the idea of a United Nations outside of the Bahamas, outside of Jamaica, outside of Barbados, telling us what to do. I'm speaking the way the layman speak.
Yeah, the local population thinks. Yeah,
that we need to educate our population that we live in a community.
Right.
We live in a community, and many people don't understand that although they make nails in China, and they make nails in Idaho or wherever they do in the United States, these countries have to follow a standard. Imagine China making a particular size nail, and when we buy it, it doesn't fit what we do here. There are universal mechanical standards.
Doors and windows.
Have to go. Okay, so same thing with living. Now, I shared last week about something. Remember that in 1848, I think it was the beginning of the women's movement with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, July 19, 1848. They marched. She organized a march over 150, 60 years ago to Seneca Falls with the idea of rewriting the Constitution or having a declaration of sentiments. Okay. And let me just read to you what a few lines would have said in this declaration of sentiments. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both native and foreigners. He has made her in marriage, in the eyes of law, civilly dead. He has denied her facilities of obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed to her. He allows her in church as well as state, but in subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry, and with some exceptions from many public participation in the affair of the church. Now, this was a part of the Declaration of Sentiments. There were 400 women and 50 men Frederick Douglass Wallace was one of those black men on that walk. But now let me jump to what I gotta share this one with you about. I mentioned last week about the fundamental rights of Afghan women.
Yes.
And I'd like you to hear how basic it sounds for many of us in the Western world. And just 20 years ago, and even coming back today, it was not existing in Afghanistan. Listen now. The right to equality between men and women, and the right of the elimination of all forms of discrimination and segregation based on gender, race, and religion. Okay, that sounds normal. Listen now. The
Yes.
right to personal safety and to freedom from torture or inhumane or degrading treatment. The right to physical and mental health for men, women, and children, for women and children. The right to equal protection under the law, to right to institutional education in all the intellectual and physical disciplines, the right to just and favorite conditions of work, the right to move about freely and independently,
Wow.
the right to freedom and thought, speech, assembly, and political participation, the right to wear or not to wear the veil or the shadri, and the last one, the right to participate in cultural activities, including theater, music, and sports. Now, imagine, it sounds like some of
Wow.
those are pretty basics for us, right?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Okay, so why would a country need to have a declaration of rights when they
Because those
supposed to
rights,
be so basic a human right privileges?
because they've been infringed upon. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly. And that's the same for many, many countries,
and
unfortunately.
ironically, listen to this carefully. When bin Laden, one of the ways bin Laden got powerful was because of the some military leaders were actually holding hostages some boys that they were abusing. Bin Laden said, "No way, I'm going to fight against this." So he won the popular vote, okay, and became powerful in Afghanistan. He did outrule all of that. Listen carefully. But we know how he ruled eventually. But listen to this. When he died, they actually sent declarations around the way men must now tie their heads, the turban on their heads,
Wow.
and boys were prevented from going to military camps because they were afraid they would be molested. Now, it's amazing these things. We have freedom. We have a different. We don't do these things. Right? It's just trying to help us to understand that around the world, what some of us think are normal, they are not normal.
Yeah.
In other countries. My wife did a study with the United Nations, and there is a particular tribe in a particular country where the fathers have sex with their sons until they reach 18 or 19. They say that's their view to protect them from not going to women. Okay, so this is a messed up world, and we got to do our best
Yeah.
to educate and inform and listen and change.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Wow.
see rights and policies.
Yeah.
No, that's a whole mouthful, right? Let me try find something, right? And I'm going to share it, right? Of course, there is so much that we can share. We can actually find. We can find these on YouTube, and we can play it. Check this out.
For a former NFL player who was caught on camera brutally beating his ex-girlfriend in front of their baby boy.
And we must warn you tonight, this video is extremely violent and disturbing. Let's go to Louis right now in our newsroom with more on this one, Louis.
Yeah, very unsettling, Calvin. And even this attack happened last Saturday, and the video is absolutely gut-wrenching to watch. Police in Oakland, Florida, now issuing a warrant for Zachary Stacy's arrest. Again, we have to warn you, the video is extremely disturbing. Here it is. Stacy is seen punching his ex-girlfriend, Kristen Evans, twice in the head before picking her up and throwing her into the TV, causing that to fall over. Stacy then picks her up again and slams her onto a baby bounce chair before leaving the house. This all happened while their 5-month-old son was sitting on the couch. The victim was treated at the hospital for multiple bruises. She is sharing these videos on social media, begging the public to help catch him. 30-year-old Stacy played in the NFL with the New York Jets and the St.
All right. So, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
So,
wonder where that comes from, right?
right.
Yeah.
What is the genesis of all of that? Now, not that person or that action that itself, but things like that can come from a number of places. Can be what they observed as children from their parents, could be what they're being told by their peers in society, could be what they watch on TV habitually, could be impacted by their personality, reinforced by negative reinforcement from outside. It could be what they hear in church, unfortunately, and reinforced in church. You in charge of your wife, you with this, you the head, don't do this, and all that. And so it can come from a number of places. Interestingly, one place it comes from is personal woundedness. Okay. Shame is one of the greatest instigators, should I use that word, of abuse. Many people have been shamed all of their lives by their significant others in their lives, their parents, their grandparents, and so forth. Shame. You can never make it. You're dumb. You're stupid. They're very little praise. People who are shamed more than praised are more likely to be criminals or abusive to others. All right. And so it comes from a very dark place, a very dark place of pain and misery. So when someone had been raised with shame, they go about trying to shame others so they can gain power over you. So they would hurt you. And whether not, if not physically, it will be verbally or emotionally. And so if you check a lot of criminals who are prone to violence, not someone who accidentally did something, prone to violence, you will see deep underlining there is a dysfunctional background, and always usually including being shamed and blamed more than praised and encouraged.
And I wanted to just add one thing to that, and I always ask this question around mental health in our own societies, and it's linked to what you're saying, Pastor, because I think people, when people are hurt at a very early age, or what that happens to them throughout their lives, how much of this is actually treated or treatable? I mean, how do we look at this at throughout the course of the life of the person? How do we as a society look at people who have experienced violence and trauma and so forth and so on? Our first recourse is not really to think about what is the mental and psychological impact. You're supposed to tough it out and get through it, right?
Yes.
But the wounds are so deep.
Yeah.
They follow you throughout your life, and you need to have that kind of counseling and support and treatment, and medically sometimes to be able to get over this, and to be able to move on and have somewhat of a normal life where it's not repeated and carried on generation to generation. We have to recognize that, and I think we have to, as a society, look at mental health and the impact on our society in a very real way, because of the number of the violence that is coming out. And I would say that during this coronavirus lockdown time, women have been, there's been more violence in the home than normal. I mean, women are always under attack. 1 in 3 women have been attacked in their lives. And so, when you're locked down with your abuser, what do you do? If you're locked down with that person who's beating you in that way, what do you do? She at least gets to have her story told because he's famous, quote unquote. But the everyday person next door, how do we ensure that their stories are told, that they get the help and support that they need? I'm talking the perpetrator and the victim, because it's about living in a society as a whole and lifting both out of this pattern and repetitive violence that we see within our homes. I think it's really important for us to think about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to share I want to share another one.
Mhm.
Right, I want to share another one, and it's this week. I really was going through, and I came across a number of these videos, and this one, this is one of the last one that I came
Yeah.
upon, and I want to share this one with you, because it always end somewhere. Um, so listen this one.
Fox 13's Aaron Mesmer's there. This is at Cherry Lake Drive in the Lake Magdalene area. Hi there, Aaron. These are awful. What are neighbors saying?
Well, they're heartbroken, Mark. They say they would often see these two people. They would be arguing. They would hear them arguing. And now they're wondering if there was anything that could have been done before it was too late.
Where'd they go? Guys are going in the front door.
It was a quiet end to an hours-long standoff between Hillsborough deputies and a man who refused to come out of his home in Lake Magdalene. From a house across the street,
The details are what's shocking.
Courtney Shaw watched and recorded the ordeal as it unfolded. And it made her think back to something that happened over the weekend.
On Saturday, actually, they had a huge fight, and she left out of the house screaming, yelling, top of her lungs, got in her car, drove away.
Detectives say at some point that woman must have come back because at about 7 o'clock Monday night, a friend asked deputies to check on her. Sheriff Chad Chronister says the homeowner, 52-year-old Charles Szyminski, refused to talk with investigators.
They turned their attention to the Jeep that was parked there, look around and see what they believe is to be a body inside of a big large plastic trash bag.
The sheriff says detectives could tell the woman was dead. They then spent hours trying to get Szyminski to come out of his house before he took his own life. Chronister says Szyminski had a history of violence with this woman, including an incident in December. We're told she was so scared, she jumped out of a moving vehicle on Dale Mabry Highway to get away from Szyminski.
Please, I'm asking anyone, don't ever stay in a situation because you think you have to and end up like our victim did today.
Neighbors even wondered if there was more they could have done.
I would say,
Wow.
Yeah. And that's exactly the point, what are we doing as a society? And we hear it all the time. You're obliged to say something. You must say something. I've been in a situation where I remember studying one day at my friend's house, and he was off playing soccer, and he met me sort of knocking on the door of the neighbor, and he said, "What's happening?" I said, "A little boy, a child in here." I didn't know it was a boy at the time, but a child in here has been crying and has been punished for more than an hour. I could hear it. And I was knocking and they refused. And then they came out really, really hostile. And I called the police. And of course they threatened me and everything else. And this was at university. And I don't know how the neighbors could be sitting down having dinner and hear a child crying for over an hour, or hear the punishment going on for such a long time. As I mentioned earlier, if you're punishing, you punish and you move on. You don't punish a child for hours and hours and hours. So the child is almost crying, it sounded like torture. And so I'm saying, as a society, we ought to be able to step up to say something. And I know we always say, mind your own business and so forth, but we have to respond. We have to say something. If you don't want to step up and get into it, call the police. Call the police and say they're fighting again. They at it again. I don't want to get into it because I don't want him to attack me or my children. So, but we have to do something as a community. We are obligated. I mean, how many? That's the last. I mean, we have, the death of a woman or the killing of a woman,
Yes.
and we often we call it femicide.
Right.
That's the ultimate form of gender-based violence.
Yeah.
It takes it to the very end. But before you get there, you have so many other issues that build up to that. You have the psychological abuse, the economic abuse that I mentioned earlier, where they withhold money, they withhold the payment of bills, they withhold, right? You can't eat. Sometimes they starve you, or they starve the children, this kind of thing. And it leads up to the eventual killing. So it's incumbent on us as a society to be able to look at that and see that. And how do you recognize it?
Can Can I want to go back again, El, to something.
Remember, just as you go, I'm just reminding our viewers we're looking for the questions and comments. I'm coming to those shortly. So please ask a question, post your comments, and we're coming to those shortly. Go ahead.
Two things. One, as I said earlier, I'd like us to take an opportunity to let the persons who are watching, and we do not know who are watching, that there is hope for
Yes.
that for you. Someone might be watching in the dark corners of your house or on your cell phone by the beach, and you're all alone. You're frustrating. You're trying to see if there's any silver lining behind these dark clouds. Is there any hope? There is hope. There are resources in your community, whether you live in Belize, the Virgin Islands, Jamaica, Canada, England, India, the Bahamas. There is hope. And we just want to let you know you can go on the internet and search for your country's name. In the Bahamas, there are crisis lines, hotlines, other countries also. And I want us to just encourage those individuals. Now, on the other hand, when that video was playing, I want us to remind the people also that although we say, and that is what I do, I educate people, and I'm an activist myself, and I work for certain agencies and so forth. The community must call when they know, and people must intervene in appropriate ways. But I want us to remember, we don't always know, and persons are trapped within their own four walls.
Right.
And they cannot, I'm using the word cannot, quotation marks, come out. Okay? I've had clients where the door is unlocked. They could run out. Okay? One other person I know in Michigan, I might have told you before, two cutlasses are standing up against the front door, and every night the husband would take them and sharpen them in her presence, never ever referring to the cutlass, never even telling her directly what they are for, but she knew what they were for. She could not leave that house. I've had other clients, they run away 3, 4, 5, 6 times. They give up because every time they run, they even go to a state street or country and they get found by their husbands and brought back home. So it's a complicated matter.
Yes.
Our hope with this video production, this Zoom Hope Live, is that we can inform and educate and inspire and encourage, because there are ways in your dark corners of your home, in your closet, underneath your dining table, underneath the bed where you're sleeping away from your boyfriend or your girlfriend because of abuse. There is a way that this can come to an end. And I just want to let them know that they're not alone, because they cannot come out. Your doors are wide open, your windows are unlocked, but you cannot literally leave the home. That's a form of abuse. That's intimidation. That's fear. All of that combined together. You are trapped in your own four walls. This is real. I just want to remind you that is real. And we're hoping that this video will inspire you to get away. And one of the institutions I worked with, we had to do the change the what do you call it in the United States, and they do in the Bahamas. We had to change their names. We work with agencies. We get the new passport, and we would put them on a flight 3,000 miles away to another part of the United States. With their changed identity. We didn't do it as an agent. We worked with an agency that did that. To get away.
And it's challenging. And if I just may add to that, and I think I'm so happy you mentioned that. Many of us are in very, very small communities. Yes. It's hard to hide. If you live on an island with 300 people, and there are some islands in the Bahamas, for an example, where you have a couple of hundred people, it's impossible to escape. I mean, it is a real problem for some people, and there are not many options, right, for them. But I like the idea of repeating this point that there is hope. There has to be a way to escape. with a phone call, with a message, with something.
And we are there for you.
We are here. I know that the crisis center here in Nassau does a wonderful job of reaching out. They have a very good support system here. We also have social services that are working on the ground in most islands throughout this country. We also have the Department of Gender and Family Affairs that is supposed to be putting in place a lot more programs and initiatives to be able to help people to respond, particularly in the family islands where we have real issues of violence, domestic violence, incest. Incest is a challenge in a number of countries and I'm sorry, islands and countries, of course, but
Definitely.
in our own country, we have an issue, and it's a taboo to speak about, but it is something that a lot of young girls are held captive and are held, by their fathers sometimes, and uncles and family members. So it's a real challenge, and we need to let them know that indeed there is hope. There's a way to find, we call them, trusted persons. And that's why I keep coming back to the church. The church needs to be that trusted person, and there needs to be someone in the church that can be that trusted person. The challenge for us sometimes is when some people go to the church or the religious communities more generally, not only the Christian church, but religious communities, they're told, go back to your husband. You have to stay with your husband. You have to, and it's sometimes putting them back in harm's way and making the woman feel as if, she has done something wrong. Perhaps she has not worked hard enough to satisfy or please or support her mate. And that is what we have to really be careful about, that when persons come to the church for help, when they come to religious communities for help, because that's sometimes the only place they get to go. You have to know to pick up the cues, to see it, to be able to understand it, not to blame, but to listen and listen well, and have the information at hand to tell them how they can get the help that they actually need.
Can we right now? I'd like to give a number for the crisis center
Please.
in the Bahamas.
So, right.
Right?
So,
And someone can
do this, Pastor. Type it in the chat, so we'll put it on the screen and we'll get back to it. So while you're talking, we have all of those.
And to be international, I have the one for Cayman Islands Crisis Center also.
Yeah, excellent.
And if anyone has for
So let's
Jamaica,
put them in and we will get to them. So I'm gonna share, and I chose not to tell anyone about these videos because I want that kind of shock effect as well. So I'm gonna share the last one because those were, it's abroad. All right, so I'm going to share the last one. There's much more. It's not the last one that happened. This is just the last one that I am sharing. So I'm going to share this one, which Eyewitness News bring to us. And this, of course, they're all recent.
Local activists are speaking out following what is now being described as the attempted murder of a woman yesterday. According to police, the incident unfolded from a domestic dispute. Activists are cautioning tonight that things could get even worse if more is not done to minimize these types of incidents. Our intern, Jose Etienne, has the details in this report tonight.
Video of the assault of a woman on Key West Street who reportedly got into an altercation yesterday with a man known to her and then ran her over with a vehicle, sparking outrage. And president of the crisis center is sounding the alarm on recent incidents of domestic abuse that have resulted in women being harmed or killed.
So many women who are living in situations where they feel unsafe and they are unsafe, and that as a community we have to deal with it. We have to respond to it. That there's no way that people should be living in this kind of fear and terror.
In the chilling video, the woman could be seen being dragged and attacked while holding a child in her arms. Bystanders attempt to assist the woman and remove the child out of harm's way before the man speeds off, only to return seconds later, striking her in the process. The attacker's car overturning after he struck another vehicle. This ordeal prompting reaction from social media users who spoke out against the incident. And according to police, the incident stemmed from a domestic dispute. But Dr. Patterson is warning tonight that violence against women can perpetuate if there is no intervention.
It'll keep continuing as children learn what they live. And if they're living with violence, then that's what they're going to become desensitized to it and then be expressing that violence in then there are other relationships, whether it's in school or on the street, or towards relationships when they get into their own relationships.
Police also confirming that the perpetrator is now in police custody and their investigations are ongoing. Meantime, the victim is now in hospital and was initially listed as stable. However,
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm
No,
not going to
it's
hear anymore. That's it.
no. I
Please
you know I
put
mean
phone
I'm
numbers
really
into the chat.
yeah. I do. You know I feel it hits me hard to tell you the truth, to even watch these types of videos is and to know that this is happening to women and children. And you know I make this point all the time, and I think I said it last week. Violence is a continuum, and Dr. Patterson said it. You know, if we don't stem it, if we don't address it, if we don't deal with it while they are children, those children will become abusers as they become older. So it's a continuum; it won't end. And so, if we really want to address violence against women, we need to look at violence in its full scope. Right? All forms of violence. How does violence transfer to domestic violence in the home in a fight with mother and father, or parents, adults to adults? How does that translate into violence at school, gang violence, and so forth? How does that translate into community violence and you know, fights between boyfriends and girlfriends in the future? How does that translate into gang violence? I feel nothing for life. I can pick up a gun and kill somebody quite easily. Or I can beat up my woman because, you know, I'm stronger than she is and I have a right to do so. And my father did it and he got away with it and it must be okay. I mean, when do you end? And then the state's response is, okay, you killed her, so I'm going to respond with violence because I'm going to kill you. With the death penalty. So to me, it's just you just see the continuum of violence, and so that's why I tell people you can't. I always say this, and I say this almost every time I speak. You cannot cherry pick violence. This kind of violence, but not that kind of violence. We can execute people, but you can't beat up your wife or rape your wife, or you can rape your wife, but you can't beat her up. Or you can rape your wife but not marry Jane next door. You know, it's just madness. We have to think about what are we going to do to address violence in this country, and I, you know, although these acts are definitely criminal without a doubt, the police is often not the first place that people want to go because they are afraid. Not necessarily of the police, sometimes of the police, because they feel the police isn't going to respond favorably to them. Sometimes they feel that, or they've called the police a lot. I've been around to the police station on Bull Road, and they tired seeing me, and I ain't going back, and maybe I can go Wolf Road or something like that. But they don't want necessarily to go to the police. So we have to be able to say where can they go? Yes, the crisis center. Yes, social services. And so we have to remember when you go these places, there has to be the kind of response that can actually help these people, because we're talking about life and death, oftentimes, right? I mean, it's to me like you hear like that other lady said, oh, we heard them fighting, we saw them fighting. You know, to me there has to be something more. When you go to the department, if you call the department, there has to be a place you can call where you can get the kind of support. The easiest place, again, I repeat that, is often our religious communities, and people will call and say, I'm afraid he's beating me up, or I don't know what to do, or something like that. And you will see it. It's so interesting. We had a session. I had a session with children in Grand Bahama, and we were talking about harassment and so forth, and a trusted person. Who are trusted persons? How do you identify them? How do you know? Because you may not be able to trust your teacher sometimes. They may be the perpetrator of the violence. You may not be able to trust your mom because she may be supporting her boyfriend in the whole violent situation. So you have to how do you identify the trusted person, know who that is, and be able to get your message out? And where is a safe space? Right? So the church, the religious community has to be that safe space, ought to be that safe space. It's not always. Because sometimes harassment and violence happens there. So we need to be able to say, here is what is happening. When I look around the room, when I give these presentations to teenagers and so forth, I watch body language. And Pastor probably can say more about this than I can, because this is the kind of work that he does. But you almost can tell. when something is going on. The way they look down, they look away. Then there's no direct eye contact. There's almost a feeling of embarrassment, and like they're trying to almost go inside themselves. If the earth could swallow them up, they'd be happy. You could actually see it in the faces. So I'm saying that teachers, Sunday school teachers, or whoever it is, adults who are supervising afternoon care, look for signs. Look for signs of children who may need help, and not only for themselves, but sometimes for their sister and brother. Right? They may know of it and they can't say anything, because if they say something, they're going to kill. One little boy said to me, if I kill him, will something happen to me? Will I go to jail? Will something happen? Will they take my mom away? Because these guys that are doing these things are often playing on the minds of the children and the women. So we have to offer those safe spaces, I repeat, and among those ought to be the church.
I want us to come back to that. But just before we do that, I want to take a short break, right? And we want to do a few things. We want to remind you to make your comments. We saw some. We're going to come right to those after the break. So please, your question and your comments, they are welcome. So we want to show you a few things. First, we want to promote the Footprints of Hope, because, there's hope in Jesus. So we want to promote that, so you can watch that this evening and the rest of the nights to come, and make that a part of your schedule to lift your spirit. And then we want to also play End It Now video. Mark you, it is in Spanish for most of the part, but so you'll have to read the captions. So after the break, we will be back with some more discussion.
Are you hopeless? In despair? Fearful? Thinking of giving up? My friend, there is hope beyond all situations.
Join us for the Footprints of Hope Walking with Jesus online evangelistic series with international evangelist Pastor Glenn O. Samuel.
Come experience a musical celebration with powerful and spirit-filled messages.
I come by just to tell somebody your blessing may be delayed, but it can't be denied.
Join us January 15 to February 12 at 6:30 p.m., except on Thursdays, and on Saturdays at 10:30 a.m.
Tune into the Jamaica Union Conference's YouTube and Facebook platforms, all 5 conferences' social media platforms, NCUFM, NCUTV, Bless TV, WCCN, and HopeBeyond.net.
The series is an initiative of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Jamaica and the Inter-American Division English-speaking unions.
Come with me on this exciting odyssey and discover life's real purpose.
Your new life is just a click away.
See you then.
Acción que daña y no por accidente.
Son actos donde someten mi cuerpo y voluntad en mi hogar o trabajo.
Cuando mi esposo se burla de lo que hago, cuando me ordena qué vestirme, incluso hasta con quién hablar.
Es una fuerza destructiva.
Violence causes anger, pain, and sadness.
Es cuando te amenazan, te lastiman o pierdes tu libertad.
Cuando obligan a una persona a hacer algo que no es de su agrado.
C'est toute action qui cause des conséquences négatives, physiques, spirituelles ou morales.
Es el hecho de atentar contra la integridad, la dignidad y la libertad de la mujer en cualquier ámbito.
Problemas o crisis existenciales.
Vergüenza, pero puedo salir adelante.
Produce inseguridad, produce dependencia emocional, pero todo eso puede ser diferente.
Control y angustia. Identifícala.
Violence can cause psychological damage and stress that go unnoticed.
Produce miedo y baja autoestima.
Miedo agresividad y falta de confianza.
Ça produit des sentiments de culpabilité et d'échec.
El mundo precisa oír las voces de las mujeres que necesitan seguridad física, seguridad emocional, seguridad espiritual, seguridad psicológica y seguridad social. Escúchalas. Speak out, don't be silent. Parle-en, no te calles.
That video, that video was done in the main languages: French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English, not just Spanish.
Not just Spanish. I was just about
Portuguese, French, and of the Inter-American Division of 3.7 million Adventists ended now. I would like us to talk specifically about some things about domestic violence itself. For instance, there are 4 characteristics of abusive behavior I want to share. One, it's a learned behavior. We have inferred these things already, but I want to put it in the systematic way. All abusive behavior, it's learned, right? It starts in the home or someplace significant in your life. Secondly, it's selective. The perpetrator often selects someone they perceive may be weaker than they are. A woman, a man, children, or whatever. Then another characteristic of abuse behavior, it's permissible. Yes, permissible, meaning some agency, some group of individuals, the society, the community, the church, whatever, your significant others around you actually allow you to do it. Should I use those words? Do not respond to it, are silent about it, and neglect, ignore it. It's okay. It's as a private matter, so it's permissible. And then the last of the 4 characteristics of abusive behavior, which I'll have to explain, is cyclic or cyclical. Abusive behavior, it is learned behavior first of all, then it's selective. They select individuals whom they feel are weaker than they are, right? And that it's permissible. Society permits it, or the community in which they live. And then it's cyclic, C-Y-C-L-I-C, meaning that it's cyclical. Abuse has, there are maybe various forms of explaining this, but the standard one is the 3 phases in the cycle: the honeymoon period, the tension building period, and the explosion period. So abuse is always cyclical. In other words, there's always after the abuse, the big blowout, then comes the honeymoon stage.
Right.
The apologies and blaming a little bit and sorry and crying, and it goes on for a long while or short while, and then again it starts again, the tension building with some of the issues or complaints come up again, and then there's the explosion, not necessarily physical, or it can be physical or emotional, whatever. Okay, now the timing between these phases could be 1 hour to 10 years. There's no scientific way it has to be 5 weeks. It has to be 6 weeks. It can be 2 weeks, 1 day, within the same day. It can be months, and that's why it's so difficult for some people to admit or acknowledge that they're being abused, because their cycles are so large. We've been on a honeymoon now. People would say it's been a year or 2 or 3. So the next phase is tension building, and then abuse again, and that cycle can go on in some relationships 3 times. Others it could be 33 times. Okay, so that's a very important understanding about abuse, all kinds in the human family. So, and at the foundation of all abuse, all forms of abuse, is the misuse or use of power and control.
Yeah.
The use and or misuse of power and control. We say, and or, but misuse or use of, rather. In some instances, it's actually use of. Others, it's not that, it's the misuse of power and control. In other words, for a parent, we have power over a child. All right, just to use those terms, we have power over a child, and we misuse that. All right, that's a form of abuse. Okay, in a couple relationship, there's no power over, so it's a misuse of power.
Right.
Okay. So, or use of, misuse of power. But I just want us to understand those dynamics about abuse. And there are many people listening today, male or female, that that you might say, think everything is okay because he or she didn't do something bad for 6 months or 6 years. But when they look back over a 30-year marriage, they might have been going through a cycle very slowly. And every time that physical abuse was worse or worse or worse. And you get trapped. You're trapped into this relationship. And the most painful place to be when there's terrible abuse is in your own domicile.
Yeah. You have to be attacked in your own home, and that's a challenge. If I may just add to that, I think it's going to be important for us. And when you mention that it is allowed to happen, or perpetrators are allowed, are somehow getting away with it because they feel they're allowed to, it happens, and then there's silence around. But the state has an obligation, and we mentioned that violence against women is a human rights violation. Each individual have a right to a life free from violence. That's a right, and it's not something that is bestowed, as Pastor Brennen said last week. It is something that is inalienable. That's something that's, you have it because you're a human being. You're a human being, and you have a right not to be beaten up every day, a right to a life free from violence. And the state, and when I say the state, I mean the government of every single country, has an obligation to protect you.
Those rights.
An obligation under the law. In their own domestic laws, they have, the laws, Domestic Violence Act, or they may have Sexual Abuse Act, or something specific. In different countries, it varies. But they have an obligation under the law to respond. Yeah. But they also have signed on to, and this is something that Pastor Brennen mentioned, we as the Bahamas signed on to, or we ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. We accepted the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and we said we will do everything within our power as a state, as a government, as a people, to end all forms of violence.
Have we done that?
And the question is exactly, we have not done that. So the state itself is failing. And I mean that. And, in a sense that the state has maybe been successful in introducing laws, but laws are often having no impact
on the books.
You have to do more than just set up the law. There has to be actions that you take that ensure that re-educate people about gender roles, about discrimination, about biases and perceptions of women and men in society, about peacefully solving disputes. How to resolve disputes within your own settings, within broader settings. What kind of society are you trying to build? And that's a part of it. A part of it is it, and they talk about, some rights are immediate. Immediately, you should not be beaten up by the police. Yes, that's an immediate right. And if you are, you can take that to court. And some rights are progressively realized, meaning this is not going to happen tomorrow. We're not going to change the culture and mindset of people tomorrow. We cannot take them all to court this afternoon. But over a period of time, as a government, as a state, as a people, we ought to be trying to change this pattern of a normalization of violence where it is acceptable and people feel that they can get away with it.
Keen Adams make a point, and Yvonne Adley, and I'm going to take those 2 points. The first one by Keen Adams, and he made this point earlier, and it comes right back up again. So we need to normalize reporting and having tougher measure against perpetrators.
Can I'm not sure if you're aware of policies. I'm sure Gaynel. Could we remind our viewers in the Bahamas in particular what our policies currently are. Many 20 years ago, it was not as, should I say, good as it is now. Everyone is responsible for reporting.
Yeah.
Everyone, a pastor, a teacher. Before it was not so specific. Reporting to social services, police, your suspicion or knowledge of abuse, and we are accountable for that. You want to explain some more about that, Gaynel?
And as you say that, there's something I want you to relate to is the normalize. So we know that they're responsible to report it, but how do we normalize it? All right. So
normalize the reporting.
Normalize the reporting, and that has to do with education, I think, and a feeling and education, yes, and building a society where people feel safe to report. Like if I report, I won't be harassed or killed myself or beaten up myself. People need to know that when they report, that it will there will be some end result to it. There will be something positive coming out of it. So it's about this is a very it's a multi-layered challenge, and it's not something that's going to happen quite easily. But the largest part of this process involves education at so many different levels in terms of how we do this in different settings and how we do this for ourselves, educating ourselves. But I agree with the person that wrote this that we have to normalize reporting. Reporting has to be not just for those who have a responsibility, because certain people have a response. If a child is in your care and you notice it, you must report it. If you see it, you must report it. You have a legal obligation to do so. But it ought to be everyone. And everyone doesn't feel that they have that obligation to report, right? And if they don't report, they're going to be held accountable for something, not reporting, right? So reporting, normalizing it, making it an obligation for persons to say you must report if you know, and if you don't report and you know and you didn't report, then you have something. You should also be accountable for not reporting. If you know a child is in distress, the child is being beaten up or sexually abused, and you do nothing, you ought to be accountable as well as the perpetrator for not reporting. And that's a part of it. And so, the state isn't prepared to go. The government, and I keep referring to the state, that's the word we use all the time, but governments and countries more generally are not wanting to go this far because they feel that they cannot police every single home in that way, right? So those matters that come forward to the police, they're prepared to respond to. But that's precisely because they cannot do that. We're saying that you have to let your citizens be responsible for reporting.
Community.
And more importantly, we have to educate people about what is the kind of behavior that is expected of them. What is acceptable? If you beat up your child to the point of killing them, or hospitalizing them, or breaking a rib, or breaking an arm, or something, or knocking out an eye because you hit them with the belt. I know one of my neighbors, that happened to him being beaten. His father basically took out his eye. And so, there has to be some accountability. I don't think anything ever happened to that father.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I don't think any neighbor had said anything. It's like, oh yeah, he lost his eye. His father beat him, and he moved and he got the wrong end of the belt. So, but there has to be an obligation of the placed on the state. The state has to feel obligated, and they must hold people accountable for these actions or inaction in terms of the non-reporting and so forth. So the state itself has to take some action, and it has to introduce more programs to educate, and it has to take actions against those persons that are perpetrating and those who are not reporting or making this act, perpetuating this act because of their indifference in society.
All right, let's read two more quickly. Ivan Adley, sometimes people suffer these violence because violence and it's right here. Sometimes people suffer these violence and afraid to speak out because of security issues or challenges.
Yes, and we've spoken to that. And many times those of us looking on the outside do not understand the dynamics of what they experience on the inside. This is why programs like this is so important. And so, and I've been writing in a newspaper for almost 20-something years now. including some of these topics. And I've been told by persons, certain things I've written have helped them to understand. So people want to be educated. So they cannot speak out, or the securities also include where do they go to feel safe that someone will understand them. Child, just pray about it.
Exactly.
Go back to him. He see what he doing to you. He gave you that good house and give you a car for Christmas last year. Stay with him, child. Pray about it, and then that's the yeah, that's very common. So our goal is to take away the normalization of abuse, so we can normalize reporting abuse.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And so,
well said. Very well said.
Alison's contribution. So thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Keen. No, Alison says, good afternoon. Often persons are reluctant to speak because of the status or situation of the abuser in society. Example, a spiritual leader, community, notable leader, right? And I pause because this is so true. Persons with access abuse it, or fear of losing certain status that they have.
That's very true.
Very true. Very
Let's
true.
start with the.
She continues. Often persons do not speak based on the status or situation of the abuser. It's again. Spiritual leader or civic leader. Also, they may be enjoying a social or financial status.
That's correct.
That they do not wish to lose.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Let me share something with you. I've worked with a few female.
We will take keen comment after this one as well.
I've worked with a few female victims of abuse. But they were not even aware that they were being abused until after attending a seminar on abuse.
Yeah.
Right. Then they were able to look back and say, you see, because they didn't have cuts and bruises. So what they were going through, crying all night or whatever, or what he was saying to her, that was normal, but it was serious. So his education is so important. But it's correct, going back to what Alison Rose said about the standard in which you're living, your economic status. Many people stay in there because they may feel they are stupid, and they're told that by their friends sometimes, who ignorantly don't understand the dynamics of abuse. And then your own pride and embarrassment that I have to come out of this relationship or report my husband or my wife. So that's why we need more support system, more education, more understanding, and more awareness. This is something, Larry, you can do this every 6 months for 2 episodes with Gaynel and I. 20 years.
We're up to it. And if we put that back a little bit, Spence, what can be said? Because there's 2 things here I don't want to miss, because throughout last episode and this episode, we've been calling on society and we've been calling on the church. But here, Alison said, sometimes you have spiritual leaders and civic leaders who are actually the abuser. And hence, we have the apprehension in terms of saying, hey, I am being abused. Can we speak
Society harbors the abusers.
Exactly.
We treat them and we protect them. So it is a challenge. I gotta give this, I always say it, I was on the Child Abuse Protection Committee for almost 20 years in the Bahamas. And our greatest challenge was getting support of pastors. All right. And one of the reasons would be, one pastor in his quiet corner said, because we are involved in doing this stuff. Some of the pastors. I don't want to say that too loudly, but yeah. Okay. Secondly, many pastors have been seen coming out of the homes of their affairs 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay, and they get up in the church, holy at thou on Sunday or Saturday or Friday or Wednesday morning, whatever denomination it is, according to denominations. And this makes it tough. This makes it dangerous.
Yeah.
And they cover their image with a cloud of their demeanor of graciousness and spirituality and sanctimonious righteousness, when they are, as using one man in the Bahamas said, a wicked. They are wicked.
Yeah. But I still do think that the government, the state, has a responsibility. And that responsibility has to do with, no one is above the law.
No one.
No one is above the law. And so we have to say there is going to be zero tolerance of violence against, particularly violence against women and children. Zero tolerance, regardless of who you are. You can be whatever leader in the church or whatever, leader, civic leader or politician or millionaire, whatever, in the country. It will not be tolerated. And that has to be a clear message. And I think when that message is clear, we will begin to see some different behavior.
Right.
Because you mentioned earlier that it's learned and people do it because they can get away with it. If there are real consequences and accountability is there, they know that they will be held accountable. I think that people will begin to behave a little bit differently. If they are exposed, we have this thing in international relations we talk about in diplomacy, and we don't like to do it, but it's called naming and shaming, right? But in my view, it has its place. It has its place. It's not going to be the first thing we do, but we need to let people know that nobody is above the law. And if you feel you can get away with this, we will name you, we will bring you before the courts, we will charge you, we will do what we need to do, and we will ensure that you are held accountable, because no one is above the law.
Right.
And we all are equal before the law. Yeah. And that's it.
And I think that's really important. I'm happy that you say that, because even if one believe I own the church, I decide who get disciplined in the church or who is not get disciplined. The government, you're saying, Gaynel, hearing that, you say, okay, the church don't do anything, or your community has done anything, but we're gonna do something because it came to our ear. So that's going to be investigated. And when that kind of pressure is there, the carpet will not hold things any longer.
No.
The closet will not be a place, because it's going to be investigated. And I believe that goes right back to what Keen is saying: normalize
reporting, and that's it. We're going to be, and this is Pastor Brennen said, it is unfortunate that the UN and others have to talk to us about this, but it happens. When we go to report, and we're saying, oh yeah, we're doing something about that. Oh yeah, but we can't give anything concrete that we've done in the last 5 to 10 years to really make a difference, right? As a government or as successive governments. I'm not speaking about any particular, administration. I'm speaking about the government and successive governments. What have you done to put some systems in place to ensure that you break down some of the stereotypes, and that has that whole idea that, the person's high in society, so, we can't report them or nothing is going to happen to them. I saw a woman who got beaten up. She couldn't see anything, eyes puffy, whatever. She said, oh, I can't do anything. His father, this is some years ago. Sorry, his brother is the minister. And I'm like, so what? I mean, who cares what his brother does for a living, if he's a politician or not? Nobody cares.
Right.
You must. I mean, in the end, she decided not to. I was trying to really convince her to file a report to the police. Right. And that's it. I mean, the challenge is this perception that nothing will happen to them because of who they are, and because they're a minister in the church, and they're they're
we
this
see
and
before and nothing happened. So
exactly, but the state itself has to be responsible. This is a part of it. Until the state has the will to act on these things, I believe very little has happened, because we are not fully committed. We're into ceremonies in this country. I'm going to say it quite out. We're into ceremonies, and we like ceremonies, and we're going to tie the ribbons, and, we're going to have this celebration, and we're going to honor, Mary Jane for what she's done for the last 15 years for women's rights. And I'm like, concretely, what have we done? Have we introduced new legislation? What are the policy programs that we've introduced? How are they functioning? Are they fully funded? Do we have staff at the department? Do social services have? Are the NGOs fully coordinated and supported in what they're doing? Do we have shelters in the country? So we need to go down that list and say, realistically, which of these have you done? And the answer will be very little. We have and we may have mentioned it last time, Pastor Brennen, the National Strategic Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. We have this, a National Strategic Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. We had a task force. I believe, Pastor, you might have been a part of that task force, but they came up with some very good recommendations. They analyzed, they assessed the situation in the country. They analyzed what the challenges are. They came up with recommendations, at least quite a number, but 10 low-hanging fruit. And then it's just sat. And I'm thinking, these are the same recommendations that CEDAW gave, the same recommendations that the Special Rapporteur gave, the same recommendation that the Universal Periodic Review gave. And here we are. We're drowning in recommendations on what to do. What we lack is will to do it.
All right. So we're out of time, right?
Yes, we're out of time.
Yeah. So this is what we're going to do. I want you to give a final word. Really to pull everything up. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think of that. So while you think about that, listen to this ad, folks, on gender-based violence.
Another pandemic is raging in our country.
No time.
Freedom cannot be achieved unless the women have been emancipated from all forms of oppression.
Right, we start with you, Pastor Brennen, then Ms. Gary.
I am happy we had this opportunity to share these two sessions. I want to encourage the viewers, those who are in the dark corners, that there is hope. I don't know if you put the numbers up. I had put the telephone numbers in the chat. If you can run them across, I have for Cayman Islands and for the Bahamas. And all we need is leadership with gumption, authenticity, and integrity to get things done. Just remind the viewers that there is hope. There is hope.
Thank you, and I just want to say thank you for the opportunity as well. It's been a really good discussion. I always value the opportunity to share on these types of issues, and hopefully something that I said would resonate with someone, and they would go out and speak to others about it. I encourage us to speak to our community leaders, local government leaders, to our members of parliament. The more somebody said to me the other day, oh, you're doing something that we're already doing as an NGO. And I said, I'm so happy Because for me, the more people that speak out on ending violence against women, the more people that speak out in support of gender equality, the more people that speak out about protecting, promoting, respecting the rights of every person in this country to a life free from violence, the better. That's how it is for me. I encourage you to really take that step forward. States are largely responsible to do something. It's not that they're sitting back. They should be sitting back and as bystanders. They're legally obliged. They have signed on to international treaties and conventions, and they have accepted the responsibility to respond to violations. They have accepted the responsibility to take action, to do something, to
Right.
protect, to respect, to promote the human rights of all persons within the society.
Thank you so much. So, it's Gaynel Curry. We have you 2 weeks, and Barrington Brennen, 2 weeks of being intentional in not leaving any stone unturned or cutting any words as we look at this pertinent issue of gender-based violence. It's ended right now. And it ends by start having these conversations and also by intentionally moving into actions. Policies are there. Are they all perfect? No. But if we begin to do what the Lord has called us to do, we will see a big change. And that was, I believe, the essence of what I've heard from both of you. So we just want to say thank you so much for contributing to Zoom Hope Live, not just the program itself, but also infusing hope across the globe through this channel. So thanks again, and we pray that Lord will bless you, Gaynel and Barrington, as you continue to do what you do to influence and impact lives for the kingdom of God.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, yes, what a way to begin with an episode like this to make a change in our society, a change in your home, a change in your life. Please go over to zoomhopelive.org. Interact with our website as we develop there our social arms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Thank you for your subscription. And until next week, we want you to just be intentional in playing your part in stemming gender-based violence. God bless you. On behalf of Kevin Spence, the technical director, I am Larry Green. Be blessed until next week.